I'm getting deja vu. I've seen Alpine branding on a Renault before and it was just a cosmetic pack. Although something tells me this is going to be a little different. This is the Alpine A290 and at £40,000 it better be more than just a lick of paint and some go faster badges. So we've come to the sunny island of Mallorca to see if our top grade A290 GTS can justify costing £3.5 more than a Mini Cooper SE, and why even the entry-level A290 GT still costs a full £10 more than the Renault 5 it's based on. Don't forget, similarly fun hatchbacks like the Mini Electric can be had for less than half that price on the Cinch app. And no less of a problem is the fact I actually own a car this Alpine can count as a spiritual predecessor. So I'm not going to be easily impressed. Now this car definitely feels like a Renault 5 Turbo for the modern age, and it's got plenty of inspiration around the car taken from that legendary model. I mean, look at the front up here where the first ones are shown. It's the fog lights, which look just like the ones you'd have got on the rally cars of the 80s. And they even have the X's here, which are a hark back to the tape you'd have put on the glass lenses. Although unlike that mid-engine Renault 5 Turbo, this Alpine has all of its muscle up front because it's running the bigger and more powerful electric motor from the Megane E-Tech. And so that means that we have 220 and 300 Newton meters of torque. But you might be thinking, well, that doesn't sound like a ton of performance for a heavy electric vehicle. So we will be testing how that feels on the road and track later. But before we do that, you might have noticed these things down here, but don't be fooled into thinking they're adjustable dampers, because while this nipple twists, it doesn't firm anything up. Things certainly seem pretty solid up front here because you see these wider wheel arches. They're inspired by the Renault 5 Turbo, but they're not just here for the cosmetics because they actually hide a much wider front track. In fact, this is 60 millimeters wider than before, and that means we've got 30 millimeters more per side. And we've also got bespoke Michelin Perfomance tyres. And yes, eagle-eyed viewer, those are the same brake calipers you'll find on the Alpine A110. And also taken from that brilliant sports car is the E-Diff technology. Meaning all things combined, this front end should have masses of bites. And then there are these lines here which mimic the rear intakes of that mid-engine Renault 5 Turbo, and they lead into the muscular rear arches which give the car the same bulldog stance. And at the back we've got rear multi-link suspension, which isn't common on cars of this size, and it should have given engineers more room to play with when giving the car better ride over bumps and better stability through the corners. And doubly ensuring that is the fact that this car's 52 kilowatt-hour battery, which is quite small, is nice and low in the middle of the car, so that should help with centre of gravity. And if you're wondering, by the way, the car overall is under 1.5 tons, which is pretty light for an EV. And yet Alpine still felt the need to give this car hydraulic bump stops, which are designed to really absorb and compress the worst of roads. But, well, given it's pretty light as it is, does that suggest they're not confident in the ride? We'll test that in a little bit. But first, I really like the design on the back of the car. I like these nods to the Renault 5 Turbo, including the fake vents on the sides here. And you might be wondering, where are the aerodynamics on the tail of the car? There's no wing, for example, and that's because Alpine has really focused on making this car as slippery and as drag low as possible. And so that's helped with range, but it leaves the door wide open for a higher performance aero version. Now, lightweight sports car, it might make you think it's going to have a compromised interior, but well, that couldn't be further from the truth in the A290. I mean, look at these lovely seats. They're really nice to sit on as well. They're very comfortable, plus they get this cool design as well. And that is true for the rest of the interior because it's just like a lifted version of that already lovely Renault 5 cabin. And there are a few key changes. I mean, the most obvious one is actually we've lost the gear selector here and we've gained in its place this Alpine A110 inspired button selection down here, and they're actually a lot racier to use. It's very cool. But you do get a lot of stuff that's very familiar. I mean, the infotainment system is the same and the screens are the same. They wrap around you, which is cool. They run Google, and of course you've got wireless connection to your smartphone. But the key thing is what you gain for the Alpine, because in this menu now you've got racier features. And so what we have is this new telemetrics section where you've got live data, you've got coaching, and you've even got challenges to see if you can improve your driving and also make the most of the car as you go along. But what really excites the drivers and people like me is the new pivot point adjustment setting, which you can find when you change the drive mode. That tweaks how the braking works to make the car, so Alpine says, more playful, especially on track. We'll test that in a bit. Other toys I'm really excited to see are these on the buttons, because they're just like the ones you get in a Formula 1 car. You've got your regen adjustment down here, and you even gain an overtake button, which we're told is like a push to pass button in a single-seater race car. those bode very well for the raciness of this car. Although, of course, you've still got a lot of the sensible stuff you get in the Renault 5. There's the same storage and the same kind of functional features. And I'll leave those for Ben to explain in more detail in the Renault 5 video on our screen now. But for this car, I'm very excited to drive it, although we should probably see where the life in the back is just as nice. Ah, yes, this Alpine A290 has the same problem as the Renault 5 when it comes to the back seats. I mean, I don't have much in the way of knee room, foot room, or even headroom. So if you're an adult, well, you're not going to want to be sat in the back seats. And that's if it's being driven slowly. If it's being driven quickly, we'll put it this way, I'd rather be in the front. And unlike the front, you don't get any USB-C ports. All you get is this 12-volt port here. Things are a lot better around the back because just like the Renault 5, this A290 has the biggest boot in its class. It's actually got a boot that is bigger than the Mini Electric. But because this is the top grade car, instead of having a space under the floor to store away our charge cables, instead we've got a whacking great subwoofer. And don't get me wrong, it really adds to the quality of the interior feel, having such a powerful and really good sound system, but it does mean your charge cables are going to have to be thrown in here somewhere. Although, given this is a small car, at least there is still a good amount of room, as demonstrated by Jamil's not very small carry-on aeroplane bag. And of course, you can fold down the rear seats if you need more space. So, usability-wise, it's all right. So that's the part you'll use to convince your significant other to let you buy the car done. But how does this new Alpine cope with day-to-day driving? I had such a high expectation for initial feelings of raciness, but the first thing you notice is just how much it feels like every other EV at the moment. It's just really quiet. There's nothing in the way of fake engine sounds. The steering's really light and, well, yeah, it's just kind of muted and numb. I could easily be in anything from any other brand powered by an electric motor. But there are some signs that this is a bit of a serious car because I'm feeling immediately that the ride is actually quite nice, and yet I'm not getting any feeling of wallowiness, so it feels like that's nicely judged. Just like the Renault 5, this Alpine A290 is on the taller side when it comes to hatchbacks, and so my seating position relative to other hatchbacks is quite high. But because the car's interior sort of wraps around me, I do feel like I'm nice and low in it, and I feel like I am connected to the car initially. Plus, visibility is very good. Door mirrors are very chunky. I can see over the nose of the car easily, and even looking in the mirror, it doesn't feel that far back, and that is because it isn't. Threading through a Spanish town, a Mallorcan village, is very easy, and also we've noticed right away, while the damping and while the suspension definitely is on a firmer side of things compared with conventional cars, it actually feels really high quality. It doesn't even seem to get too upset by the pitter-patter and the cracks that you get in roads, and while we haven't found any UK-style potholes out here in Mallorca, we are finding a lot of bumps and ridges and the sort of stuff you'd get on a B road, and well, at the moment, feels pretty comfy.
That might come as a bit of a surprise for anyone familiar with hot versions of the Renault 5s from the 80s and 90s, because they weren't that supple. But obviously, they more than made up for it by providing miles and miles of fun.
Now, you're probably wondering, how much time do you have to play in an A290? And the answer, if you go for the entry-level car with 180 horsepower, is you've got 236 miles. But if you go for the more fun 220 horsepower car, well, then you lose 10 miles from your claimed range, which is fine for urban driving, but when you're out on the open road, it might be a bit stressful. So you're going to want to know how fast it will charge. And handily, if you find yourself a 100 kilowatt plug, it will actually go from 15 to 80% in just 30 minutes. So it's not really a problem, is it? Oh, doesn't reach.
Assuming you have more brain cells than me, once you've got the car juiced up, you can get back on the road and use some kilowatts in sport mode.
Pick up the pace and the toys you've got on this car start to make more sense. I mean, this overtake button down here in town is a bit jerky and a bit tricky to use, but when you're on an open road like this, I can demonstrate what it's all about. Now, coming out of a bend, if I were to just accelerate hard, the car is simulating with its torque delivery a slightly more combustion engine feeling. It means the torque is growing gradually, but if I were to just even drive at half accelerator right now and then press this button, well then we get a full surge of torque right away. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a break your head off of your neck sort of acceleration, but it's certainly exciting, it's certainly enjoyable, and certainly enough for a quick overtake, which is kind of what the button's all about. On the flip side, this car does have a technology that leaves me a little bit worried given it's a sports car, and that is brake-by-wire, because it means there's no physical connection between the brake pedal and the calipers. But there is a sensible reason for using this on the Alpine, and that's because it uses software to prevent the usual slight miscommunication between electric regenerative tech and also the physical disc to pad stuff. And so it means software can make it feel a lot more natural. No longer do I have a step change in feel when I'm on the brakes. It does actually feel pretty good. And at speed, well, I can demonstrate if I pick up the pace and get on the brakes, these aren't overly assisted. It feels quite a lot like the Ioniq 5N, and I mean that in a really good way because the brakes aren't really reactive, but when you lean on them, they are very strong. But what about the corners? Because this is an Alpine, and of course, the A110 is a brilliant handling car. I was a little bit worried when I got in this, but I shouldn't have been, because I can tell straight away, not only is this car nicely controlled, and I can feel all of the mechanical setup on this car doing its work, those bump stops and that multi-link rear suspension, but also it just feels beautifully judged. It feels nice and central on its rotation. The steering weighting is really good, and all of the control weighting actually feels nicely matched. And if you do come up to a bend and tip it in, well, the car doesn't mind at all. In fact, it quite enjoys it. I mean, EVs typically, they can feel a little bit numb and light on communication, but that's not the case in this. And it's because you've got so many things giving you messages. Those brakes are nice and progressive. Even the steering at times has a little bit of feel. And plus, you've got some sounds as well. Okay, they're piped in and they're a bit artificial, but they're based on the noise the motor is making. So if I get a bit of wheel spin, well, I can hear it through the speakers and adjust my accelerator pedal accordingly. And also I can feel through the E-diff, I can feel the tyres scrabbling on the front axle telling me we're at the maximum grip, but at the same time, it's all right, keep going. And you know what? The handling through the corners in this car, the balance and the chassis, well, it all feels very promising. Of course, on the open road, you can't get quite to this car's limits too easily. It does have a ton of grip on those Michelins, but the messages it's giving me and the feeling of positivity on the front is all very promising. But I think the best place to test that out is going to be out on the racetrack. Because when you're out on the asphalt, well then you can really feel the balance of this car. Now what I'm looking for is something that feels like a Renault Sport Clio, because while I've been referring to the Renault 5 Turbo throughout this video, for me personally, as a Renault Sport fan and someone who owns a Clio 182, well, I've always yearned for Renault Sports to come back. And Alpine, in effect, is the Renault Sport of today. So this, in a way, is a successor to my old 182. But does it go into bends like one? Well, the brakes are really good, and it has a lovely pointy front end up the curb. And the torque, do you know what? You can just feel the front axle struggling to put the power down a bit. That E-diff, while it is effective, it's definitely not as good as a limited slip differential, a mechanical one. But what is good is the fact that if I come off the accelerator into a corner, and even if I trail the brake, well then I can feel the back of the car coming around. This is a playful car, although I am also feeling it is rolling a little bit more than I'd like it to. If I owned one of these and I wanted to track it, well, love flat curb, well then I would probably stiffen it up a bit, but then that would kind of defeat the point, wouldn't it? This is a great all-rounder and no one's going to drive one on track, but if you did take one on track, well, it's good to know we can do this. Now, I've been playing around with the pivot point adjustment, and I can tell you that it simply just makes the car a little bit more oversteery. Oof. Even under power, I can feel the back of the car just wanting to come around. That is just like my 182. And this car is 400 kilograms heavier. They've mastered it. They've done a really good job, Alpine. But there's definitely room for a much stiffer one, much firmer one, much racier one. I smell an Alpine A290R for the track.
We might not even have to wait too long for a beefed up A290, because the Alpine engineers that I've spoken to have all but confirmed that the car is capable of much more. And that is music to my ears, not just because it follows the form of the A110, but because it repeats the philosophy of the old Renault Sport days. Start with a good car, make it faster, and even more extreme. Of course, the formula has changed a bit. I mean, there are no naturally aspirated engines or manual gearboxes this time around, but I've driven all of the best Renault Sports, and I can tell this Alpine, while very different, is made by the same people for the same people.
Is this the 182 replacement I've been yearning for? Well, in many ways, yes, it is. This really does feel like a car, not only to bring the brand back, but also to make Alpine a big player in the UK market. And well, let's be frank, even with its exceptional A110, it hasn't been that so far. This is the car to make Alpine big in Britain. Until you discover one glaring omission, one unforgivable feature that is missing from the interior of a French hot hatch, and that is a cup holder. Why is there no cup holder in a French hot hatch? I mean, where am I supposed to put my coffee? I need coffee when I go out for my drives. And I mean, I'd let them off if it had space for a cortado or a flat white, even if it was.
It turns out that Alpine is working on a 3D printed cup holder, and it'll be offered like the Renault 5's baguette holder. But here's hoping it's a no-cost option in this near 40 grand hatchback. If not, well, the Renault 5 gets them for free, but if you like your cup holders to cock a wheel, you'll want to watch my Alfa Romeo Junior road and track review.